And a lot of those plans, unfortunately, get passed on these days to the employee. The employer's not paying it, the employee is. So it's really hard to get an exact number of what the plan's actually costing. Hello, this is Mark Silverman, managing member and founder of Silverman & Associates, and I'm also a certified financial planner professional. I want to welcome you to the Saving With Silverman podcast. I'm glad you're here. Each week, we'll discuss different financial planning topics because making smarter choices about your money impacts the quality of your life.
Mark, let's talk about the weaknesses of 401ks. I know that you spend a lot of your time talking about 401ks with your clients, and your 401k can be your most powerful retirement savings tool, but it's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. Let's talk about some of the weaknesses that you should be aware of in your 401k or a 403b or a TSP or a 457 plan, whatever it is. First of all, one thing you have to consider is administrative costs, right? That figures in.
That absolutely does. Nothing's for free. Even if you don't see the fee, it doesn't mean it's not being charged, Ron. It's tough. We've called companies. I've had clients call. We've done joint calls where we'll actually call the HR department and say, what are the fees being charged on this plan? A lot of times they'll give you a range. A lot of times they'll say, it's somewhere between 2 and 4%. They'll never tell you exactly because there's so many different fees that are out there, and it's hard to really look at that. One, obviously, one of the fees would also be, the investment expenses. So if you're in mutual funds, you have the expense ratio of the mutual fund. There's also administrative costs of the plan, et cetera. And a lot of those plans, unfortunately, get passed on these days to the employee. The employer's not paying it, the employee is. So it's really hard to get an exact number what the plan's actually costing.
Well, as we've talked about so many times in the past, a lot of people have no idea what kind of fees they're paying inside their portfolio. And that's another reason why it's so important to talk to a financial professional like Mark Silverman, because he knows the questions to ask. We are talking about 401k weaknesses here, and in addition to administrative costs, they are mutual funds and not a whole lot else, right?
Yeah, typically, most plans include mutual funds. We are starting to see some plans that include some ETFs, which I prefer. Exchange-traded funds is what those are. But most plans are still using, traditional mutual funds, and those could range in different expenses. Your bond funds are typically cheaper than your stock funds. If they're international, they're more expensive than domestic funds. If they get into some crazy, derivatives or alternates and commodities, that kind of thing, then they become even more expensive. So it really depends on what you're invested in, and that everybody's situation is different, and you got to have the right mix, and you got to make sure that you're rebalancing. One of the biggest problems I see with people who have 401ks is they set up their investments, whether they're doing it themselves or working with someone initially, but they never change it. And things get out of whack, and you've got to rebalance it at least once a year, if not more, to make sure that your allocations are staying consistent with what your goals and objectives are.
Well, let me just say that we are talking about the weaknesses of 401ks. And, a lot of people think about 401ks. A lot of people have them, but there are some weaknesses that have to be considered. And Mark Silverman, of course, has the True Wealth process. You can get started with that by making a phone call to his office and get a 15 to 20-minute introductory call. We'll tell you more about that coming up in just a few minutes here on Saving with Silverman. One other thing I wanted to mention here is there are limited asset classes involved with 401ks, right?
There are. And what we're seeing is less and less choices because keep in mind, the more choices that your employer offers, the more expensive it is to administer the plan. So you typically don't see as many choices as you used to see. They're more limited. So you really have to understand what those choices are, what the fees are, and what they're investing in. Sometimes people get invested in things they don't even understand what they're investing in. They might buy, 3 or 4 different bond funds and don't even realize they're investing in the same asset class with different funds. So you want to make sure that you know exactly what those asset classes are and what the diversification looks like, and making sure, again, like I said earlier, that you're rebalancing it on a regular basis as well.
Well, we're talking about your average 401k here. There are some variables involved here, but in the average 401k, you get subpar conservative investments. You want to explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, there's different types of investments that are in there. We talked about bond funds. There's also money market funds, which is obviously the lowest typically paying fund. It's conservative, but you're not going to keep ahead of inflation. Sometimes you'll even see what's called a stable value fund. And that is kind of like a money market. It typically will give you a little bit higher rate than a money market. The problem with that is a lot of them have restrictions. You can't get in and out of those as easily as you can some of the other funds. So you got to be careful with that, because if you do need to make a change and you're locked into it for a certain time period, that could potentially be a problem. So you need to understand really what you're investing in. If you haven't reallocated or really looked at what you're investing in over a time period, that could potentially be a problem. So you want to make sure that you're either working with someone who can help you do that, or really get clarification on making sure that your investments are aligned with what your goals and objectives are, and understand the risk that's built into those choices, and making sure that you don't have a lot of what's called overlap, meaning you're investing in a lot of the same mutual funds that are investing in the same sorts of things. You want to have a diversified portfolio, whether that be stocks, bonds, et cetera, making sure that mix is right for your situation.
This conversation is all about 401ks, and again, there are some weaknesses. Your 401k can be a very powerful retirement savings tool, but it's also not perfect, and you need to be reminded of those things. And of course, that's what a professional like Mark Silverman could do. I know that, Mark, there are a lot of people out there who would love to get acquainted with you, and I'm going to give out the phone number in just a moment here so they can arrange that. But what happens when they make a call to that number?
Yes, as Ron said, if you reach out, what we will do is I will set up aside some time to sit down for an introductory call where we will get to discuss your situation, tell you a little bit about our planning process and how we work with clients, and decide if we're a good fit. And if so, we can set up what's called a get acquainted meeting, where we can get more in depth about our process and your situation, and discover if we're even a better fit, and decide if we want to work together in solving your financial planning needs.
You've been listening to the Saving with Silverman podcast. If you have any questions at all about your financial situation, please give Mark Silverman a call. Again, his number is 520-333-7601, or go online to savingwithsilverman.com. For Mark Silverman, I'm Ron Stutz. We'll see you next time on the Saving with Silverman podcast.
The Saving with Silverman podcast is brought to you by Silverman & Associates Wealth Management, LLC, based in Tucson, Arizona. The show is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and everywhere you listen to shows. Subscribe to the show on your favorite app today and never miss an episode. Just search for Saving with Silverman to find us, or visit savingwithsilverman.com to listen to past episodes, to contact Mark, and to learn more about how to make smarter decisions with your money.
Did you know that Mark Silverman also has a radio show? Tune in to Saving with Silverman Saturdays and Sundays at 3 p.m. on AM 790 KNST.
All matters discussed on this show are for informational purposes only. Opinions expressed are solely those of Silverman & Associates Wealth Management, LLC, and staff. All topics covered are believed to be from reliable sources. However, Silverman & Associates Wealth Management, LLC makes no representation as to its accuracy or completeness. This show shall in no way be construed as a solicitation to sell securities or investment advisory services to residents of any state other than Arizona or where otherwise permitted. Topics should be discussed with your individual advisor prior to implementation. Fee-based financial planning and investment advisory services offered through Silverman & Associates Wealth Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor in the state of Arizona. Insurance products and services are offered through Silverman & Associates, an affiliated company.